So welcome back to day 2 of SRAP Live. We're thrilled to have you all joining us today. I am Sherry Duggar. I'm the Executive Director of Socially Responsible Agriculture Project. We had a wonderful start to our event yesterday with conversations around community stories, as well as a really great discussion about factory farm gas and the harms that it brings to communities already suffering injustices brought on by concentrated animal feeding operations. I found the talks yesterday inspiring. They served as a good reminder to me of the power that we see in individuals and groups and communities standing up and speaking out in order to safeguard their futures. If you were unable to view the discussions yesterday, or you want to revisit and listen to them again, we'll certainly have recordings of the entire event available soon after its completion. Please feel free to reach out to us for recordings of panel discussions that you may have missed. Today, our discussions will cover 3 important topics. The first one is going to be moderated by Maria Payan. She's going to be talking with her group to explore the environmental injustices that are rampant in communities where concentrated animal feeding operations exist. These facilities are intentionally built in rural areas where residents often lack the political and economic resources to effectively protect themselves. These operations are also disproportionately constructed near low-income and Black, Indigenous, and Latinx communities, constituting an egregious environmental injustice that has persisted for decades. Rural communities, farm workers, public health, the environment, and animals are all harmed by industrial agriculture. Rural residents living near these operations understand this, but what they may not know is that the production of contract farmers who operate these facilities suffer too. And I guess with that, do we want to go ahead and get Maria's panel discussion started?
This is a really important panel. We are going to be talking about, can environmental justice be achieved with food sovereignty? I think that most probably listening know that with our livestock production system, our industrial livestock production system, comes a lot of injustices to the environment, people, animals, the planet. We are going to be talking to some of my favorite people, I will say, when we talk about this subject. We have Dr. Sacoby Wilson with us, who is an environmental health scientist at the University of Maryland School of Public Health and the founder of CEEJH. We have Leila Borrero Krouse, who is an organizer and immigration specialist with CATA, which is the Farmworker Support Committee. We have Jeremy Young, who is the executive producer of something called Aljazeera Faultline Films. And for anyone who has not seen this, you really need to look it up. And we have Jay Monteverde, who is the program director of Namati, U.S. Environmental Justice Program. It's actually an international, but Jay is the head of the U.S. program. So I would like to start, Dr. Wilson, with you. We are going to have some questions and then give folks a chance to interact with questions and answers. So if you can put them into the chat, we will get started with getting as many questions addressed after we go through our panelist questions. Dr. Wilson, with industrial livestock production comes not only environmental injustice, but a whole host of injustices. It's very complex. We know that there is farmer injustice, worker injustice, communities without access to healthy foods. We hear that regenerative agriculture is a solution, and we're hearing the term food sovereignty. Give us an overview of why there are injustices in this industrialized food system and how food sovereignty and regenerative ag can be a solution.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Thanks for having me. You know, I started doing my work in North Carolina with Dr. Steve Wing on environmental justice issues associated with industrial animal production, looking at industrial hog farms. So if you look across the spectrum of these operations, part of the EJ issues come from the fact that these facilities are located in primarily low wealth communities. And in some places in Delaware, folks are unincorporated. So that means they don't have a town mayor, they don't have a town council. It's contamination representation. That if you look in North Carolina with industrial hog farms, they're primarily located in poor communities of color. And so basically these communities have been used as dumping grounds for animal waste. I mean, we would never allow unless you're in Alabama, Mississippi, we would never allow human waste to not be treated. And the reason why I mentioned Alabama and Mississippi, they're actually straight piping human waste in Alabama and spraying it on the grounds, just like they spray hog waste on the grounds in North Carolina, right? So if you think about the waste management systems, our waste goes to a sewage treatment plant. But the waste from these hog operations go to a cesspool, a hole in the ground, an it pit. I'm not gonna say the first part of the word, the SH, but an it pit, right? And then you got the tech, they call that technology. Putting a hole in the ground, y'all, is not technology. Having a big pile of chicken waste 8 to 9 feet tall is not technology. So if you live near these operations, if you're hosting these uses, right, you've been exposed to things like ammonium hydrosulfide, which, you know, Dr. Wing's work and other work of some of his students and team members in North Carolina, burning the eyes, nose, and throat, right, lead to immune suppression. One of his students who's now at Hopkins, Dr. Chris Haney, is looking at the issue of MRSA viruses, right? The viruses that can impact people who live nearby. The workers are being exposed to MRSA and bringing it home. You're seeing high levels of these organisms. And then think about COVID-19. COVID-19 has laid bare our policies that made our populations invisible, right? Like our meat packing workers, like our farm workers, right? So the differential impacts of exposure to pollutants like ammonia and hydrosulfide, volcanic compost, particular matter, the differential impacts of exposure to nutrients for the folks who are unincorporated, or the folks who are incorporated, but they have well water. Think about the runoff from the hog farm. Think about the wind-blown chicken waste, right? The chicken boo-boo that gets into your well water, right? And then also the exposure to the biological agents. That's what people are experiencing if you host these facilities. And you think about the fact that the workers, you know, are exposed to these chemicals, exposed to these organisms, and they bring it home to their families. And then the farmers, right? The farmers who, in many ways, it's a new form of sharecropping. They're on the edge, the precipice of economic disparity, because they had to keep signing that dotted line and keep building more, more houses just to keep up with their bills, right? So it's the folks who are most impacted by the environmental externalities, the health externalities, the people who host it, and then some of the social and economic externalities about the workers, right, and the health externalities, and also the economic externalities for the folks, the farmers, right. So you think about regenerative agriculture and food sovereignty. What are these solutions? With regenerative agriculture, how can we be more in line with our environment, with our ecosystems, right? Doing agriculture that's more in line with nature. Where food sovereignty is saying we should have a right to grow our own foods the way we want to grow it. So we want to get away from this broken food system, because the food system we have right now in the U.S. and globally is really food apartheid. LaDonna Redmond, who was a food activist in Chicago, coined that term, food apartheid. We have a broken food system that has built-in racism, built-in injustice. So what's the solution to that is food sovereignty, being able to grow your own food where you want to grow it. In urban communities, growing your own food. In rural communities, growing your own food. I have a micro farm at my house, right? To people who've been to my house. I want to be able to grow my own food and make sure that I'm doing it in a way that's beneficial to my family and to my community. So the way to address this environmental injustice is through regenerative agriculture. The way to address this environmental injustice is through food sovereignty. And we need to make sure that our dollars, when it comes to investments in food infrastructure and farming in this country, that we're not subsidizing poison, right? We're not subsidizing pollution. We're not subsidizing animal waste that's dumping on our communities. We're not subsidizing biogas plants, right? We're not subsidizing an industry that's basically killing our rural communities. And so I'll pass the mic.
Thank you so much for that very impassioned look at what our food system is. And I think it really needs to be stated just as passionately as you always do, Dr. Wilson. Thank you for your work in this field. Leila, I am going to come over to you. You know, SRAP's been a great coalition partner for years with CATA, as well as SHIN and CEEJH. And your work and our work down here, especially in terms of workers' rights, even when we're talking about workers in the processing plants or workers that are in the factory farm system, which take care of the houses there. Can you tell us about your work and some of the injustices that we see down here on the Eastern Shore in terms of our industrial system?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Leila Borrero Krouse. I'm an immigration caseworker and an organizer with CATA. CATA is an organization that started with farm workers, especially in New Jersey. They have an office in the southern part of New Jersey, in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, and now here in Eastern Shore of Maryland. We work a lot with poultry workers and workers that come from abroad with a special visas to work in the United States. And during COVID, we have been very, very busy since the COVID situation started. I went myself, I went with the health department to poultry plants to get people tested. And we went in many other places providing services, not only to poultry workers, to farm workers. I go to migrant camps, and as the same that Dr. Sacoby saying, I visit a lot of farm workers that live in trailers near the, now they have like a big open barn for all the manure for the chickens, and the trailers are very next to it, and the children live there. I seen parents that get off from work after picking up the dead chickens, going through the long coops, sometimes 3 and 4 of them, and then they come home and the kids, want to hug them, and that, I know they're exposed to all that in the with the chickens in the fields, and it's same with pesticide with farm workers. They, sometimes they don't even know what they're applied in the fields. And of course, they bring that home to the children or the families. I'm constantly going to people's, I knock people's doors. I go visit it everywhere, in every event that we have. Now we are coordinating with a task force from Salisbury University and Tri-Communication Mediation Group and the city of Salisbury. We're going everywhere, every county in the Eastern Shore, passing out our information, because COVID have displaced a lot of workers. And with the poultry industry during COVID, it was a lot of back and forth. I hear from the workers where they have to work in close proximity. They use like plastic shower curtains hanging in between sometimes, but they work so closely that doesn't matter if they have that plastic or not. They have to bump into each other, moving the trays or whatever they're doing. They work inside, with the cold areas and wet, and a lot of disinfectants that they use affect their bodies, or affects, their respiratory problems that they get. And also they tell me about bathroom breaks. Is a lot of issues between bathroom breaks the workers do not get in the poultry industry. And with the farm workers, it's pretty much the same, because they're supposed to have portables going everywhere they move within the quarter of a mile that they work. And we don't see that, or portable water, fresh, clean water and cold that they can drink, especially in the summer days. So going on and on, the workers do tell me all these issues, but they are very afraid to come forward and speak about this, because they are afraid of losing their jobs, or the ones that come for a special visa, they're afraid they might not call them back next year to work. In their substandard housing sometimes that they live. And even here in the community, the poultry workers, sometimes they're 2 or 3 generations or multi-families living in one household. And that brings, you know, a lot of problems with during COVID for, you know, for being tested. A lot of families said, no, I don't have it. And they don't always say who lives in the household because they're afraid if they're being tested at work. It was a lot of issues about poultry workers going to work and being tested or taking the temperature. And if they had a little temperature, they would say, take an aspirin, take something, and they send them to the local, you know, the main, it's supposed to be like a clinic that they have with someone. Sometimes they're not there and they're told they need to buy something to take it or take something cold to bring the temperature down when they take the thermometer. It was a case that a Haitian family, he was told to eat ice cream, and that has been documented. So a lot of abuse with the workers in the industry. We also have hatcheries here. A lot of people does not understand that it's not just the poultry plant here, Purdue or Monteverde or Allen's Harem. We have hatcheries, and we have a lot of farmers that are connected with all these farms, including Tyson in Virginia. And we have workers that commute to Virginia or Delaware. They go to, you know, state line, and they travel together in vans, sometimes 15 passenger vans, sometimes a minivan with 7 people in the van and no face mask. And so all these worries have been brought around to health departments and to, you know, everybody that I talk, I bring this out to the light, because the workers trust me, and I have been working here in this area since 1986. I have worked in many other agencies that provide services to the immigrant community. So I have, you know, I have a position here with trust in the community, and they know when I speak about this issue, I'm not going to bring their names or any personal information that may target them and bring more, you know, consequences to them and their families. We're not here to give out any information about a person or family. We want to hear their concerns, to bring it out to people like you and other audience that, you know, I have a lot of Zoom meetings. I was talking early with James, and sometimes 2 or 3 meetings a day. And it's always the same issue. Talk about the families, talk about the community. And we well know that the community is here, they're staying, they are a great workforce, but we don't take as good care of them as we should.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leila. And that is just a perfect segue into our next guest, Jeremy. Jeremy, you tell the stories that the states that host a lot of these agricultural operations and some of the media, the power of this industry, they try to keep this out of limelight. So your job is so important to bring these injustices in front of folks, which is like, you're my personal hero. But anyway, I had met you, honestly, you know that, you know how hard, because you've been here. I met you in the height of the pandemic when there were serious outbreaks and injustices with the processing plants, with the workers. And matter of fact, they were trying to decertify the union here at the plant in Selbyville during the pandemic when I met you, right? So we work to help get you in touch with some folks, and out of this amazing documentary that you created, this mini documentary, it was Emmy nominated, and it was called Virus on the Poultry Line. Can you tell the audience what drives you personally to do this kind of work, and what was most surprising to you when you worked on this specific project of the poultry processing workers during the pandemic?
Wow, Maria, thank you for that introduction. I initially was hoping I could yield my 5 minutes back to Dr. Wilson so he could do some more preaching, because that's like
You're
good
not
for
the only
good.
one that has that.
It's like good for the soul, you know.
Yeah.
So just to introduce myself a little bit, my name is Jeremy Young, and I'm a senior producer at Aljazeera English, and I work for a documentary program that's called Faultlines. And I produced an episode of this program in the Delmarva Peninsula, focusing on poultry plant workers and their exposure to COVID-19. And I particularly wanted to focus on poultry plants because in the spectrum of meat packing plants in the United States, poultry plants have always been at the bottom. And if you don't know a lot about the labor force within the poultry plants, I know Leila knows a lot about this. And Leila, thank you for all of your work advocating for both farm workers and poultry plant workers. And I should add too, I also do have some experience with farm worker families. I've worked on a documentary about children working in the fields and the children of farm worker families. So if you guys want to talk about farm worker issues as well, Leila and I both can speak to that. But you know what, with poultry plants historically, African Americans worked in poultry plants for decades, and as they began to unionize and advocate for their labor rights, poultry plants, much like other meat packing plants as well, looked elsewhere to try and recruit new workers. And Latino immigrants in the United States became a primary source of workers. And even more recently, as they've started to organize and gain a voice, poultry plants have continued to look for vulnerable populations, in particular undocumented immigrants and immigrants from countries with major domestic conflicts, to come in and work in the plants. And I think I knew this was not going to be an easy project, but even I didn't realize how hard it was going to be to get workers to speak to us off camera. I mean, on camera is like a whole nother thing, but the workers were just absolutely terrified. And you know, another thing to understand about poultry plants, especially in Delmarva, but I'm sure this is true elsewhere, they generally exist in locations where there just aren't other good sources of jobs. So the workers don't want to lose the income that they have for their family. And they're terrified. They're absolutely terrified to speak out about what's going on inside the plants. And you know, just the fact that these plants they're factories. You know, people in this country don't realize that their chicken that they eat comes from factories. It does not come from farms. And what we had to do to get inside these facilities, one, we had to get hidden cameras in the hands of workers who could bring those in at great risk, I might add you, if they had gotten found out, to show that there wasn't social distancing. In spite of what the companies were saying, there was not social distancing taking place, because it's impossible to socially distance inside of a poultry plant. They're not built for that. And in addition, we also went undercover. The correspondent who I worked with actually went in for a job interview and said, you know, if I'm interested in working here at the Shelbyville plant, Maria, I think you remember this, you know, what would it be like? And again, you know, they really downplayed what the risks would be, especially with regards to COVID-19. They lied to us about how many workers had gotten sick and have died. And one other thing that I wanted to add, that you asked me kind of what drove me to really work on this story and become moved by it. There was one particular incident at a poultry plant in Arkansas where a worker had died, and they published an article about it in the newspaper that this worker had died of COVID-19 who worked at the plant. And I kept seeing out of the language of the poultry companies that these people are heroes, and we really need to honor their sacrifice that they're making in order to continue to put food on our plate. And yet, when I asked to find out who this worker was, they wouldn't provide me with their name because of privacy considerations. And this double standard of how we want to hold up these workers and thank them for the sacrifices that they're making during the pandemic, which is fine, but we can't bury them in graves that have no names. And it's incredibly disrespectful for the sacrifices that these workers make. So that's kind of a little bit of what I wanted to share. I'll also add that for those of you who are in the DC area, our documentary was included in an exhibit at the Anacostia Community Museum. It's called Food for the People. And it is it's an indoor and outdoor exhibit that will be on display through September of next year. So if you get a chance, you can see our exhibit, or you can see some of our documentary as part of that exhibit.
Thank you for that. And Jeremy, I'll add, you did a whole interactive piece with that as well, that SRAP was a part of on the interactive piece, which is, I mean, you went well beyond. It was fantastic. And this is actually a perfect segue again into Jay. So Jay, you know that we are talking and doing coalitions down here. SRAP, Shen, and SESH are partners with the MidAtlantic Environmental and Economic Justice Coalition, the newly formed Namati Coalition, where we're working on not only what communities say no to, but what they say yes to. And I think this falls into that category, right? Where we need to bring some different yeses and get some control over some of these injustices. You had some experience with urban food sovereignty. How does that relate to justice in our food system? And how are we going to change this? If you can talk a little bit about urban food sovereignty and some of the coalition work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Maria. And great to be in discussion with everyone. I'm Jay. I'm based in DC. I'm the program director of the Namati's U.S. Environmental Justice Program. And I've been doing environmental justice work in the US and abroad, including in China and the Democratic Republic of the Congo for a decade plus. Recovering lawyer, used to do environmental justice litigation in Illinois and civil rights litigation. And the organization I work with, Namati, focuses on grassroots justice and grassroots power building. Maria previously mentioned we're an international organization. We started working in other countries like Sierra Leone, India, Kenya. We also work in Myanmar and Mozambique, and we work in the US. And in all of these places, we work closely with communities to help communities to build power, to organize themselves, to grow people power, and to fight back against systems and injustices using the law and using the power of movement organizing. And so the MidAtlantic Justice Coalition is an extension of this. It's a coalition we're building in the region across DC, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. And it focuses specifically or especially on environmental and economic justice, but it crosses many, many other intersecting injustices: food justice, housing justice, transportation justice, et cetera, et cetera. And like all of Namati's work, this is about building grassroots power. And a lot of times when you're talking about advocacy to change policies or advocacy to pass laws, it's not rooted in the communities, and it's not rooted in the people who need to benefit from the policy changes the most. And so this coalition that we're building, and we're very honored to be partnering with Dr. Sacoby, Leila, and Maria on this coalition, is centering frontline communities and centering communities that are most impacted. At the heart of all of these intersecting injustices are one of the key pieces that bring them all together, and where we're targeting is this unfair concentration of money and power. Other folks have already talked about, just huge agribusiness and exploitation of workers, exploitation of small family farms. That's the same story in cities. That's the same story in rural areas. This concentration of wealth and power and the continued accumulation of it to the point of sacrificing whole communities and sacrificing whole regions of states. That is the sort of like underlying evil or the shared evil. And our strategy to oppose that and to fight back against it is to build people power and to build a mass grassroots movement that can fight back against that accumulation of wealth and power and can remind and demand that officials do their jobs of serving the communities that are electing them or that they represent, and countering that imbalance of power and changing the shift. Before talking specifically about the sort of like urban food sovereignty piece, one piece of this coalition that ties in well to that is Maria mentioned, not only saying no to things, but also saying yes to things. And pieces of the environmental justice movement have a lot of times been focused on like no more toxic facilities, no more pollution. It's sort of this no, 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 which creates or can sort of end up in a dynamic where there's not a really strong answer to, well, what should people do for a living? Or, what are people supposed to do for a livelihood? And you have large companies, whether they're industrial polluters in an urban way, like manufacturing or transportation or farm agribusinesses coming in and saying, well, we're the ones bringing jobs to this community, and they win over people in that way, or they just sort of kind of buy out people in that way and buy out communities. And so another key part of the coalition is creating an alternative vision. So that's the intersection of the environmental justice and the economic justice, is what do communities want instead? And this is something, of course, the food sovereignty movement has done really well. Is like, yes, food sovereignty, that is what we want. We want to be able to grow our own food. We want to have control over our food supply. We want to know what goes into our food. We want to know how it's created, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And creating those healthy and dignified and localized job opportunities in the community is something that is really strong and really sort of motivating about the food justice movement. So urban food sovereignty. Dr. Sacoby took a lot of my talking points on this point already. And you have food apartheid in cities, places that are sort of industry bombed out. They've been polluted on the land. Communities have been divested. A lot of them are low income, Black communities and other communities of color. And now they also don't have access to healthy food. In Black communities, you see, and other communities of color, you see more fast food chains. You see tons of convenience stores with all the processed food. They don't actually have ability to make decisions, make healthy decisions for what they're putting into their bodies. And in whiter, wealthier communities, you have Whole Foods. And that's that food apartheid, this inequitable access to food. And the urban food sovereignty movement fights against all of those pieces. It looks at what the disused or unused land is when it's previously been dumped on. It has, it integrates like cleanup, assessment of the toxins and the cleanup of that land and putting it to productive use. That productive use is feeding the community and giving people job training and job opportunities to benefit themselves and their neighbors. It in every way is shifting the power dynamic. So the power is back in the community on what they grow, how they grow it, and what they're putting into their bodies. So that is, all of the points that have been raised about how the food system is unjust, that attacks all of them. It's decentralizing and localizing food growth, changing the concentration of power. And by changing that distribution of power, you reduce the potential for exploitation, whether it's exploitation of consumers or exploitation of people growing the food. And it brings the food growth closer to communities that are consuming the food. So everybody has a better understanding of what they're growing, what they're eating. They have more say in what that is and how it's being grown. And again, that shifts the power away from companies that get to decide what communities of color in cities will buy and eat to the communities themselves, and they get to make those decisions and take back that control. I'd really love to get into the discussion. So I'm going to pause there and yeah, really excited to hear questions.
Yeah, thank you. It's just been magical. Sacoby, that was for you. But we are going to get into some questions. So Jade.
So the first question we have is from Peg Clevenger. How can we get rid of subsidies that support food apartheid? How can we provide subsidies to regenerative farmers? And Maria, you can.
Okay, so Sacoby, can I throw that your way?
Yeah, just real quick. I think that's a great question. One of the things I like to say is in my signature, the people's money should be used for the people's research, for the people's solutions. It's the people's money. Why would I want to give my money to the industry to poison me? So we have to have subsidy reform. I believe in the video, the bill that was mentioned, part of the reform has to be around disincentivizing certain types of uses, so factory farming, and incentivizing family farming, incentivizing sustainable agriculture, incentivizing regenerative agriculture, incentivizing urban agriculture. I'm into aquaponics and hydroponics and micro farming, right? We have to incentivize food systems that are sustainable, that are equitable, that are just. So I think as voters, you know, to make a democracy work, it takes work. We have to be pushing our representatives to support that type of legislation, to reform the subsidies and pull away subsidies from businesses that are basically extractive and pollution intensive, particularly what we're talking about here as relates to industrial animal operations, and also those biogas, those factory gas facilities as well.
Thanks.
Thank you, Maria.
Okay, we're going to try to get in as many as we can. So I'm going to try to call on like one person for each question. Jade, can we?
Sure. The next question is from Kathy Martin. We need to be at the table when Farm Services Agency processes loans to corporate ag-oriented loan financing. How can we ask the FSA to be more forthcoming in public notice and community interaction during loan processing?
Jay, I'm going to think this might go towards you since you've had the experience in some of the Attorney General and that kind of agency work and some of the maybe justice bodies. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. A large part of what Namati focuses on when we work with communities to address environmental justice or other justice issues is really understanding what the laws are and what the regulations are, and then organizing around them to hold governments and regulators accountable. Like a lot of times people think, oh, okay, I have a legal issue, I'm gonna go find a lawyer and they'll file a case. But that's not even scratching the surface of what you can do with the law. Kathy, as you're pointing out, like when there are notice and community interaction requirements, or even like something that is vague in general that you could blow up in the media or use as a hook for community organizing, you don't have to go to court to use the law. You can use it in a ton of different ways. You can do campaigns of FOIA requests. You can do campaigns, community campaigns around environmental complaints against the CAFO, against the chicken house, against a biogas facility. And these are things that are way, way underutilized because everybody thinks like, you know, law equals I need a lawyer, meaning go to court. And so educating ourselves on the law and getting organized around the law and figuring out creative ways to use the law is a really big thing that we do in our work continuously.
Thank you.
Great. The next question I have, and I apologize if I mispronounce anyone's name. The next question is from Sarah Donofrio. And this question is specifically for Dr. Wilson. How do we address the workaround CAFOs have used to keep waste deregulated, that the waste is just healthy, natural fertilizer?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think that's a marketing ploy, right? It's a euphemism, right? When we talk about what's the euphemism? Like biogas. It sounds safe, right? In the same way with the marketing, we have to attack the marketing strategies. We have to attack agribusiness and get some reform there. I also think, as I put in the chat, then we need to address the Right to Farm Acts that allows for exemptions of these operations from being covered by a regulatory schema, like the Clean Water Act. I believe only 6% of the 4% of the facilities that are eligible for National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permits, NPDES permits, actually have permits. They're not covered by the Clean Air Act. They're not covered by Toxic Release Inventory, which is a component of the Emergency Planning Committee Rec No Act. They're not being covered by CERCLA because, real quickly, I know we run out of time. With Naima Muhammad and her folks, or those of you from North Carolina know North Carolina EJ Network, when they were saying, well, this is commerce, this is a resource in our community. When they took the waste from hog farms to the state house and put it on the grounds, they got arrested because they said this is hazardous waste. So it's a resource in my community, but when we take it to the state house and to the legislature, it's hazardous waste. So just to be succinct, we got to get them to comply, make sure they're no longer exempted, and comply with those rules and regulations. I think that's the way to address that issue.
Thank you, Sacoby. See if we can get a couple more.
Yeah, the next questions come from Hummin Haidarian. How can white-led organizations support the work of BIPOC-led organizations and community leaders to achieve food sovereignty?
I'm going to throw that to, I think, Leila and possibly Jeremy. Go ahead, Leila, and then we'll let Jeremy follow.
Sorry, my phone is ringing at the same time. Wow, that's a big question. We try to organize the workers here, and poultry workers now are fighting, with unions, the poultry headquarters fighting unions, and our workers are so afraid to lose their position. They're so afraid to lose the earning money that they take for, to survive here, plus provide to families abroad. Because when you sustain in two families, one here, one over there, it's very hard. And they want to work, and they would not complain, to bring it together. And I said this organization, CATA, tries to work with the workers, and the people who started this, and I tell this to my when I go around to workers, there's a lot of Anglos out there fighting for you. There's a lot of people that are interested in your well-being, in your family's well-being. Sometimes they're scared of African Americans, the same thing. It's a lot of issue in interacting sometimes in the work side, but in the community is bad because the minority has been mistreated. And in the areas like this one, where they're afraid to go to the police, they get assaulted, they don't complain, they get robbed, they enter the house, take everything. So they're very afraid to speak up and connect with groups, unless those groups look like them.
Thank you, Leila. Jeremy, I think you may have some interesting thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'm not going to try to answer that question because then that would make me more part of the problem than the solution. So I will absolutely check to Dr. Wilson to answer this. But I do want to add something that is a dynamic that is interesting that kind of relates to this topic, is that the companies attempt to, for lack of a better term, diversify their workforce so that the workers cannot come together. I'll give you a concrete example. I was speaking with a worker in Missouri who was trying to organize workers at a meat packing plant in northern Missouri. And part of the workforce that they brought in were French-speaking West African laborers who couldn't communicate with the largely, it was about 1/3 Spanish speaking, 1/3 French speaking, and 1/3, I know Leila said the word Anglos, but I think she meant gringos. And the companies intentionally build their workforces this way so that they can't communicate, so that they don't understand each other's cultural and sometimes religious norms. Mm-hmm. And it is a division that is intentional, and it's done to try and weaken the power of the workforce. So I know that's not a direct answer to your question, but it was something I did want to share.
But it's true. And here in the Eastern Shore, we're getting a lot of people from Haiti, a lot of the people that came across from the border. It's a lot of Haitians that speak Spanish here also. But we have a lot of Sudanese and a lot of Middle East people here that work in the poultry plant.
Jeremy, I thought you might have had a different kind of, I'm sorry, Leila, I didn't mean to cut you off. I thought that you might have had a different kind of reach out, you know what I mean, through the production. I didn't mean to try to target you on the spot like that. It was a bypass question. Dr. Wilson, we're running over, but I want to give you your voice in this because you definitely need your voice in this.
So this question, no, yeah, I think it's all right, man. I just put in the chat. You know, I think the idea is there are a lot of groups out there that are working on these issues. We have a One Ag Collaborative, for example, Delaware, Virginia, Maryland, that you can engage with. There's groups in Virginia working on ag issues, right? There's groups in West Virginia working on ag issues. And I think we need to have a big tent as relates to, you know, we all coming together. One of our colleagues who's trying to do ag work in Kentucky and Missouri and Iowa, California. I think cross racial ethnic groups in these types of feedlots, these types of animal operations, we need to come together because the tactics being used across the chicken, cattle, hog, turkey too, they're the same tactics, y'all. So I think that's part of the solution that we need to be. So don't do your work in isolation. What's happening in Iowa, what's happening in North Carolina, what's happening in North Carolina is happening in Maryland. What's happening in Maryland is happening in New Mexico. We have these big issues with industrial animal operations across the country. So I think that building collaboration and bridging across the sector, the animal type, and across race ethnicity, I think that's important. I'll stop talking because I know I think we're a little bit over time. So go ahead, Maria.
Yes, okay. So we want to thank everyone for joining it, all of our panelists.